Has Bill Self lost his ability to close, right? Like, what's going on there? I mean, is there a reason to be legitimately concerned about that possibility? Like setting the money part of it aside, I guess, for a second, even though that was a big part that we talked about. Just strictly like, hey, you had a kid on campus, you had the chance to maybe close the deal with him, get him to commit, lay out all those things that you outlined. You haven't done it now twice in the past basically week or so. Is that a legitimate concern at this point? Something to be truly worried about? Pay heed all who enter and beware this podcast. That's right. This is a Pay Heed podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer along with Kevin Flaherty. Wish I was coming to you under better circumstances, but some breaking news, and not in the good way, for Kansas basketball. We're going to be breaking that down and maybe where Kansas goes from here. But some tough times for KU over the past really week or so on the recruiting trail, missing out on some big targets. And now the question becomes, which we'll talk about later on in the show, what the heck does Kansas do now? So we'll get into that. We're going to break all of it down here on the show. Probably talk a little bit more about Jacque Vaughn. We talked about him on our previous show the day before he got announced. That was announced yesterday. So we might touch on that as well. Expand on that also. Before we do dive in, this show, as always, is brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. We're recording this on Thursday evening in the wake of some pretty big breaking news, not in the favor of Kansas. We talked earlier in the week about Darrion Williams withdrawing from the NBA draft on Tuesday. And that very same day, it was reported that he had made his way to Lawrence, Kansas for a visit with KU. Williams is a guy that has long been one of the top targets, I think, for Kansas, even when he was in the NBA draft and then certainly when he withdrew. And things were looking pretty good for KU, I think. They had him on campus, obviously, for a visit. There's now a dead period, so it didn't appear as though he was going to be visiting anywhere else. And so the question just came down to, could KU close out the deal? And unfortunately, for the second time in literally a week, a top prospect has left Lawrence, not committed, and then the tide has changed. And Darrion Williams on Thursday afternoon announced his commitment on social media to NC State, where he will go play under Will Wade. So another big blow to Kansas on the recruiting trail. You're talking about, and Dame Sarr, by the way, also committed on Thursday afternoon to Duke, as we expected, as we kind of talked about last week, when that recruitment seemed to pretty dramatically shift in the wake of the Cedric Coward news, seemingly staying in the NBA draft, who had previously been committed to Duke. But that's two really, really big swings from Kansas and two whiffs, unfortunately, for the Jayhawks at a prime position of need, as we have talked about, Kevin. And this one really hurts because we kind of talked about it earlier in the week. Darrion Williams seemed like a guy that would fit in very, very well with Kansas as that secondary scorer behind Darren Peterson. Obviously, KU's biggest need is at the 3-4 position, which is exactly what you would be using Darrion Williams for. But that's not how the cookie crumbles. That's not how the cookie crumbles sometimes. And now Kansas is left holding the bag with not very many options left as we sit here in heading into the final week of May.
Yeah, I think we said all along kind of, hey, calm down. Don't panic until Darrion Williams decides. And, well, Darrion Williams decides. And
is it time to panic?
I think it is officially time to at least be concerned, because I think there aren't very many options out there. And when you start looking at the different directions that Kansas could go, and if Kansas went out and got Stokes tomorrow, obviously, everything would be rosy. But let's be honest, Kansas got outbid for Darrion Williams. And if you didn't have the firepower to bring in Darrion Williams, you're probably not bringing the firepower to convince the number one player in the country to reclassify to come to your school. And so I think that's sort of a sobering dose of realism. The truth behind it is that it's not all about basketball, right? It's a lot of this can be traced back, 10, 15 years even, and I know nobody wants to hear it, but Kansas sort of kicking that Memorial Stadium can down the road over and over again. You have the momentum of the Orange Bowl year. Lou Perkins decides, instead of, hey, I've got momentum here, I'm going to make a dent in this thing, or I'm going to go full bore after it, instead tries the Gridiron Club, a sweets thing that was kind of dead on arrival. And, before you know it, you're in the worst decade of your school's history from a football standpoint. And that's not to say that, the Zenger, that Long couldn't have done different things to start that process, maybe take a bite out of that apple, as it were, but they didn't. And the longer you waited, construction costs never go down, Nick. Like it's sort of one of those truisms that you aren't going to look back in 2010 and be like, man, like in 1995, they sure had, expensive construction that's now cheaper 15 years later. And so as Kansas continued to sort of wait on football, booster money was needed for a football stadium. And I think it really sort of came to a head too, for a couple reasons. One, Kansas had some momentum again, right? Lance Leipold was doing a great job. Kansas started winning. People were interested. People were turning out to watch Kansas football, and you had interest and donor interest, and it was important to go ahead and take advantage of that. But I think the other part, Nick, is the fact that, as we've talked about on the show, realignment's not done. Like the last phase happened. You don't want to be Washington State and Oregon State. And the way that you're Washington State or Oregon State, and it's unfortunate to say because, both of them have had some football success in the past, but the way as Kansas to wind up in that spot is to ignore football and keep kicking that can down the road. And so Memorial Stadium has been a must-do for a while now. It became a must do, and they're attacking it, and they're doing a great job with it, and they're doing a job of it where I don't think we're going to be sitting here in 10 years saying, oh my gosh, Memorial Stadium needs more renovations or whatever else. I think they're putting it in a really good spot. The issue is that while you're doing the Memorial Stadium stuff, you hear a lot about donor fatigue. You hear about, the fact that, hey, if I'm going to this guy for this, maybe I can't go to him for that. And I know a lot of KU fans are sitting there and saying, hey, it's Darrion Williams. Just write the check, man. Just write the check. But the truth is that the money's not unlimited. And when it's not unlimited, when you're spending on a lot of other things and things that, quite frankly, and I know there's going to be a basketball head who doesn't like football who's saying, well, I don't care how good the football team is. I only care, that the basketball team competes for national titles. I hear you, but the best thing for the basketball program is also for football to come out of this thing in a really strong spot. And so because of that, you're not in a spot where you can just say, hey, let's go hit up David Booth or whoever for an extra $3 million and call it good. And I think, what we were talking about, and I'm sure we'll get into it more here in a little bit, sort of a where does KU go from here? There are some options, but I don't think any of the options are going to be as clean as like the key that fits the lock that it felt like Darrion Williams was.
Yeah, I hate to just view it only through the financial lens, but
yeah,
in this particular situation, it's difficult not to look at it that way, right? Because every other way you look at it, this would make a lot of sense for a player like Darrion Williams, in the sense that you have a chance to play at Kansas. You have a chance to be, one of the primary guys at Kansas. The selling point from Bill Self's perspective probably wasn't very difficult. It was, hey, we have a glaring hole at the 3-4 spot. You play the 3-4 spot. It's a match made in heaven, right?
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. But kind of as you outlined, like, the money plays a big factor. Money plays a very big factor. And one thing that we talked about on the show before that I do want to reiterate at this point is that I don't think you can ever blame a guy for going where there's more money, right? You can never blame a player for taking more money. In a lot of situations, in a lot of cases, these are players that the reality is they need to capitalize on a very, very small window of their athletic talents to make money, right? Because not everybody gets to go to the NBA, right? Not everybody gets to play at the highest level. So in this NIL era, I think you do see that sometimes where there's players that need to make as much money as they can, I guess, really, or maybe they view it that way, right? And so when you look at NC State, they brought in Will Wade. I'm sure they certainly capitalized on their donor base, their fundraising base, with some of the momentum of bringing in, a fairly high level coach. NC State obviously historically has been a good basketball program, so I'm sure they have that to draw on. But yeah, unfortunately, it really kind of does seem like this maybe just came down to a dollar signs situation. And you did a great job kind of breaking down one aspect of it, which is Kansas is in a bit of a tough spot in which they're trying to finance a $350 million stadium and also trying to compete now in this NIL era. And you talked about the past, and obviously none of those previous athletic directors for Kansas, I think, could have possibly foreseen the situation that we have in 2025, which is the amount of money required to fund both an elite basketball program and try to build up a football program, right? And honestly, I mean, look around the country. There's a reason why you can only count on one hand the number of schools that are truly elite level football and basketball programs. It's very difficult to do, like extremely difficult to do. And it requires an absolutely exorbitant amount of resources, both financially and everything else that goes along with that. So yeah, you're in a situation, if you're Kansas, where, as you said, absolutely, you want to have a football program that's in position to be able to compete with the big boys, because as you alluded to, conference alignment may not be done, right? That's a very real thing. Like, you want to make sure you are secure. And I think for now, the Big 12 is on pretty good standing, but I mean, let's face it, you are obviously not one of the top two conferences if you're in the Big 12. That's just how it is right now. And so because of that, you are, to a certain extent, I think, always in some danger in this current college landscape with how things go. But yeah, we talked about it before with the donor fatigue, right? That's a real thing. It may seem easy to say, hey, a guy just donated $10 million, call him up and ask him for an extra $1 million. Yeah, that just doesn't always work that way for a wide variety of reasons, whatever it may be. And so for Kansas, that's the unfortunate reality, is you are now in the midst of trying to build up your football program while also maintaining a top 10, top 5 basketball program that you expect to be year in and year out. And other teams, other schools now have money. And I think in the NC State situation, like I said, I think the Will Wade aspect, the fact they have extra donors and whatnot, but the other part of it is, I think Kansas also has been, I don't think conservative is the right word, but maybe just more cautious with spending a lot of money on individual players. I think this even goes back to, you can think about the Josh Dix recruitment going back 6 weeks ago. Josh Dix is a guy that is probably making over $2, maybe even close to $3 million. Kansas probably could have afforded that at the time if they really wanted him that badly, but they maybe chose to be a little bit more prudent with their money. And so you have other schools that say, that guy can go be our best player, we'll absolutely pay him that much money or whatever it may be. And again, then you sort of get back into what I mentioned earlier, which is, you can't really blame a player for taking the money, right? I mean, I think I think for Kansas fans, sometimes when you're wearing the crimson and blue glasses, you think, how could somebody possibly want to go play somewhere else when they could come play where the rules of basketball are literally 100 feet away from the arena? Like, it's Allen Fieldhouse, it's Kansas, it's, all that stuff, right? Well, if you take this off for a second, you can see that sometimes maybe just the money speaks a little bit more. And so it's really unfortunate, but two pretty big misses, unfortunately, for Kansas in the transfer portal, with going back to Dominic Sarr, who also did officially commit to Duke earlier on Thursday, and now with Darrion Williams. And so that really does beg the question, where does Kansas go from here? And before we get to a break, anything else you want to add, Kevin? I kind of spoke there for a little bit. I just want to give you a chance if you had anything else to add.
No, I think you put it really well. And it's not that it was all money or that NC State wasn't attractive on its other merits, but NC State's number, my understanding was higher than Kansas's number. And so if that was a factor, that was a factor in which Kansas wasn't at the level that NC State was. And so I think there are a lot of reasons to want to play for NC State. He can be NC State's star player this year. He doesn't have to be number 2. He can do that on a team that's probably going to the NCAA tournament. Will Wade is a really fun young coach to play for when you talk to players who have played for him. There are other factors there. I don't want to just sit here and be like, he took the money and ran. But I am saying that from a financial aspect, my understanding is that Kansas did not have the higher number in this one. And hopefully, for those of you who are like, how can Kansas basketball get outbid? We kind of maybe laid out some factors there for why it might be that way. Kansas is spread pretty thin when you look at the way that money is being spent right now. And of course, earlier this week, Kansas athletics had some layoffs too. And so all of that is within sort of this whole picture. And so I think we can talk about what's next, but I also think that we need to sort of start off with an understanding of where Kansas is coming from with all of that.
Oh, and by the way, there is the Damoclean sword hanging over everyone's heads, which is the rev share possibility, which you're going to have to come up with $20 million potentially as part of the rev share. So do you like that? Do you like the Damoclean sword?
I did. I enjoyed that reference. I feel like that reference is made at a press conference. Actually, maybe you made it earlier this year.
It was. It was
with Henry, maybe.
Yeah, I think it was Henry
Orange World,
or maybe it might have been Daniel Courtwright. I can't remember.
Yeah, there was a Damoclean sword reference earlier this spring, though. But yeah, it was a good reference. And the other sword that's not quite of that level, but that's hanging out there is you probably want to keep a hold of Coach Fitz with the way the baseball program is going right now too, and. I would certainly guess that he'll have his share of suitors with the way that Kansas has kind of turned things around.
Yeah. How about we call it the albatross around the neck of college programs around the country with the possibility of rep share. So, whatever literary, allegory you want to use for that, you can fill in the blank there. But we're going to take a quick break. We're going to talk a little bit more about Darrion Williams not choosing Kansas, what that means for Kansas, and more. And speaking of money, you should be spending your money with our friends at Homefield Apparel over at homefieldapparel.com. And the beauty of it is you can spend less money and get more by using the promo code PAY24, 15% off your first order at homefieldapparel.com. They've got 40 plus Kansas items, 140 other schools. I'm actually today, Kevin, I'm rocking the Youngstown State.
Nice.
Welcome to the Ice Castle, the Penguins. They've got a great logo. So I'm rocking a little bit of that.
Great logo, and you got Mark Mangino ties there too.
Is that where he is now?
That's not where he is now, but he's got Youngstown State ties.
Okay. The only thing I can tell you about Youngstown State is that it's the house that Jim Tressel built.
Yes.
That
was just it. He his very first assistant coaching job in college was at Youngstown State, and Mangino actually graduated from Youngstown State. So,
oh wow, okay, well there you go.
The more you know on this show.
Well, maybe they need to start calling it the house that Mark Mangino built instead of the house that Jim Tressel built. But regardless, you can get Youngstown State, you can get Kansas, you can get 130 other schools over at homefieldapparel.com and use the promo code PAYHEAD24. We're going to talk more Kansas basketball coming up next. Shop Chiefs tickets and more with no fees. Plus, save big with code KCSN at ticketsforless.com, the official ticket provider of KC Sports Network.
Success in real estate takes more than vision. It takes the right financial partner. When someone takes something rundown and turns it into something great, that's called a comeback story, like Brain Group. They take distressed properties here in KC, completely rework them, and then turn them into valuable real estate. But that kind of work needs the right bank behind it. Enter Emprise Bank. They're not about cookie-cutter loans. They saw Brain Group's vision, backed them, and now they're making big moves in Kansas City real estate. Talk about your partner in possible. Emprise doesn't do one-size-fits-all financing. They invest in potential and back growth. Visit emprisebank.com/KC to learn more. Emprise Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender.
It's playoff time, and if you're still just watching games, then you're missing out. With Pick 6 from DraftKings, you can turn your hoops knowledge into real cash. Just make your picks, track your score, and if you hit all 6, you're looking at bigger payouts than Prize Picks flex plays. Nobody's dropping better payouts than Pick 6. Hit 6 picks, and that's 25 times your cash. And if you beat your competitor, you could be looking at a 500 times bag in your pocket. And right now, new customers get $50 in bonus picks with just a $5 entry. The playoffs are on, so why not take a shot at making a little money while you're watching? Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app right now and use code KCSN. That's code KCSN to play $5 and get $50 in bonus picks. Better payouts, bigger wins, only on Pick 6 from DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. One per new customer. Bonus awarded as non-withdrawable Pick 6 bonus picks that expire in 14 days. Limited time offer. Terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
This is the Pay Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer along with Kevin Flaherty. If you have not already, please subscribe on audio, Apple, Spotify, and on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. We are getting closer to our goal of 1,000 subscribers. We really appreciate those of you that have already subscribed. So please, if you have not done so, it takes one click, man. Just click the subscribe button and you're done. It's that easy. And then you'll be notified when we have all of our shows that are coming out. So subscribe over there. Also drop a comment. We love all the commenters commenting on our shows as well. It's a great place for Kansas fans to share their thoughts and to join in on the conversation. So we really appreciate those of you that do that as well. So Kansas, unfortunately, the bad news is they lose out on Darrion Williams, commits to NC State after being on campus. We talked a lot about the financial aspect of it, which I think is certainly a big part of it as well. But on the flip side, Kevin, the Cardinal rule was broken again, which is Kansas had a player on campus and they let him walk off uncommitted.
Yeah, they just don't look as kindly on kidnapping as they used to. There used to be a way that you could, maybe lock somebody in a closet.
Which I just want to be very clear. We are not advocating for.
No, not at all. I absolutely do not do this. But no, back in the day, they did just about anything. But it's actually kind of funny. You do verbal commitment with me. Obviously, we had Brandon Blaney, former Kansas football recruiting coordinator, on one of our shows, and he was talking about some of the old recruiting, Wild West days and some of the things that they would do to try and get and keep guys. So that was kind of a fun conversation. But no, I mean, kidnapping aside, you want to lay out the best possible case and give, basically capitalize on the feelings that somebody has while they're on campus, when they're feeling the tug of the fog and the rules of basketball and the tradition, when they're looking Bill Self directly in the eye and it's really hard to say no. You want to get that yes.
Yeah, I think some Kansas fans will look at this and say, has Bill Self lost it? Has Bill Self lost his ability to close, right? Like, what's going on there? I mean, is there a reason to be legitimately concerned about that possibility? Like setting the money part of it aside, I guess, for a second, even though that was a big part that we talked about, just strictly like, hey, you had a kid on campus, you had the chance to maybe close the deal with him, get him to commit, lay out all those things that you outline. You haven't done it now twice in the past basically week or so. Is that a legitimate concern at this point? Something to be truly worried about?
I don't think so. And the reason why is Kansas's transfer class was considered one of the best in the country last year. It didn't pan out, but Bill Self, went out and went toe to toe with people to get that class in. The year before, the number one transfer in the country was probably Hunter Dickinson, and Bill Self was able to go toe to toe and get that recruitment done. In this high school class, the number one guy was Darren Peterson, and Bill Self went out and got that done. And I'll be honest with you, Nick, even with him having a little bit of a history at Kansas, I thought one of the best recruiting jobs that Bill Self did was maybe getting Flory Badunga back into the fold. And he was in the portal, and the way that he entered the portal with the concerns that were there and everything else, I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure. There was always a chance, but there was certainly a point in there that I was like, this isn't going to get done. And he was able to close that out. And so I would understand why somebody would say that. I just think that there's too much evidence here recently, whether you're looking at transfers over the last couple of years, whether you're looking at the high school class, whether you're looking at him getting Flory sort of back in the fold. I think between all of that, I don't think you can say that Bill Self has lost his fastball. I do think obviously it's a little bit worrying, but I don't know that you can make that jump just yet.
Well, and it's very easy to be a prisoner of the moment, right?
Sure.
It's very easy to sort of be trapped in that loop and say, in the last 6-7 days, you missed out on closing out on 2 big time recruits. And I think, unfortunately, that's probably going to kind of overshadow what Kansas has done in the transfer portal besides this, because, you and I have talked about it, and I think you and I both agree, Kansas's transfer portal class to this point, I think you would consider it to be pretty good.
Yep.
The problem is that you were missing sort of that crown jewel, so to speak.
Yeah.
A player that really would hammer it home as being a great class. And unfortunately, this is a situation that Kansas kind of put themselves in because they basically decided we're going to build a new roster entirely out of the transfer portal. And so by going out and getting a couple of really, really good players that we think are going to be really quality players, guys like Melvin Council, Jaden Dawson, and even Trey White, and getting Flory Badunga back, as you mentioned, that's all fine and dandy if you still had an AJ Store on your roster, or if you had a Rylan Griffin on your roster, because then at least you would feel a little bit better. But because you decided to kind of blow the whole thing up essentially and say we're just going to rebuild entirely around Darrion Peterson, you've now missed out on one piece, but that feels like such a big piece because of the fact that you decided to go down this route. And it's kind of funny because we're sitting here now, and as the season kind of unfolded last year, and we saw some of the struggles of some transfer portal guys for Kansas. I kind of advocated here and there for Bill Self and the staff to take a different approach in the transfer portal, to say, don't just go out and get the guys that are ranked high on 247 Sports or on 3 or whatever. Maybe go out and try to find guys that you think are going to actually fit together into Bill Self's system. And Kansas kind of did that, right? They went out and got a couple of guys that I think are going to fit into Bill Self's system pretty well. But again, the problem is you're missing sort of maybe that one final piece, and now you've missed out on 2 guys that would have probably fit in as that final piece in a big way. And I think that's why this feels so devastating, right? I mean, I think I don't think you would. I mean, you would still be bummed regardless, but I think the reason this feels like so devastating is you specifically decided we're going to rebuild the entire roster, and you went out and got some guys that are really good fits, and sort of left the door open to get maybe that one other star guy that you can pair with Darrion Peterson, and along with Flory Badunga coming back, and you've missed on 2 guys. And now all of a sudden that's where you get this sort of extreme overreaction of panic of, man, it doesn't even matter that you put together maybe an otherwise quality transfer portal class with some of the guys that I mentioned, if you didn't get the guy to sort of finish the whole puzzle, so to speak. And that's the issue I think that Kansas finds themselves in now is you've maybe, again, gone out and by all other accounts, maybe brought in a pretty solid transfer portal class, but you missed out on the crown jewel a couple times. And now you're sitting here towards the end of May, and there's not any other great options. So now all of a sudden you're looking at ending up with, I think, what fans may view as a lackluster transfer class because of that fact, right? Because of the fact that you didn't get sort of the big time names. You got the guys that I think are going to be great fits. You got the guys that I think are going to be able to have impact, but you didn't get the big name. And Darrion Peterson is obviously one of the big names. And so you can lump him in, I guess, into this conversation a little bit because he's going to be new to your team, even though he's not a transfer. But because you kind of tore the whole roster down to the studs and tried to build it back up, it feels like you're missing a key supportive wall. I wasn't a construction major, but I'm assuming whatever that term is, supportive. What do they call that? Support beam? Is that what it is? Whatever the hell that is. Missing one of those.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think when you look at it and you look at the team as it is right now, right? Because you're starting to get to a point where Kansas is going to add a few more players, obviously. Like, they're going to fill out the roster. But you're getting to a point now where you're kind of like, what if they aren't guys that are going to start? And so you start looking at how does this thing fit together? Is there a path forward where Kansas is still really, really good? There is, but it involves a lot of what ifs. I feel like, what if Darren Peterson is absolutely the best freshman in the country, is a first team All-American? What if Flory Badunga makes the leap and it is a first round pick, like a lot of people thought that he was heading into the season? If Flory becomes, 14-8, 15-8 guy versus, say, like a 12-8 guy, like maybe that's something you can do. Elmarco Jackson was, a former 5-star recruit that we heard great things about last spring. If he becomes, this guy that plays with confidence, has the athleticism and all those things, yeah, it would solve some issues. You're also talking about somebody who struggled as a freshman and is coming off a major injury. And so there's it's not that there isn't still a path to being good. It's just that so many things would have to hit right? Like, you would be pulling the slot machine and it would be coming up with the 3 cherries all right in a row for you to do it. There's just not the margin for error. Now, there are still a couple big pieces out there, and potentially weirder things have happened. Potentially you get somebody who leaves the NBA draft that maybe you weren't expecting, that you can try and hop in on and put them as part of that process. Are you going to be able to get involved with like a PJ Haggerty this late? Probably not. They kicked the tires on RJ Luis, kind of decided not to go that route. Do you reevaluate now? And if so,
I've got something to say about RJ Luis, which is, if you are an internet sleuth like myself, which, first of all, I shouldn't say I'm internet sleuth, but if you are online, RJ Luis posted a TikTok yesterday on Wednesday in which he created a meme clearly saying that he's staying in the NBA draft. Now, he has until the 28th to change his decision.
Yep.
But if you are down in the weeds and involved in the meme game, you would know that RJ Luis at this point posted on his TikTok that he is fully 100% focused on the NBA draft. He hasn't taken any college visits, so he at this point, as of this recording, still is fully focused on the NBA draft. We'll see.
This is the only type of reporting that you can get here at Paygeek. Like, we're the only ones who will give you that level of scoop right there. But I'm just saying, like, there are very few tentpole pieces still left out there, and in all of them, there's a but, right? Like, but whatever. I also tend to think RJ Luis maybe has some AJ Storr vibes to him a little bit. And so, there are some things there. I think you're going to see Kansas probably go overseas for a guy or two. The issue there is you're probably not getting Adame Sarr at that point. You're probably getting somebody that can fill a role, come in and be another role player. That's not necessarily dooming in itself. Johnny Furphy was a guy that was added in August and was somebody that obviously came in, wasn't necessarily a quote unquote star player, but wound up playing a pretty major role before heading off. I'm just saying there aren't a ton of options out there. Could you also have a reclass from, I don't think it's going to happen with Stokes, but could you have another top guy decide to reclassify and maybe you're able to, there are different ways that maybe you can still skin the cat, but at this point, none of them are readily apparent, right? There's not one that you can look here and have a checklist on your refrigerator and you're just like, okay, like B is checked off. Let's just go to C and everything is hunky dory. And so I think that's the difficult thing about this too, is Darrion Williams was a terrific fit. He was exactly what Kansas wanted. You could argue he was exactly what Kansas needed. But even beyond that, it was the fact that without Darrion Williams, there's a lack of a clear, apparent plan B / plan C that you can just say, okay, let's go all in this way. And I think that's maybe the scary part about this.
Yeah. I do want to kind of touch on some things you said there as well, and also maybe talk a little bit about more specifically some players to keep an eye on as well that Kansas may try to go after. Maybe talk a little Jock Vaughn as well. We're going to do all that coming up after this quick break, so we'll be right back.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network. Make sure you download our new app. Find it on the App Store or Google Play. Just search KC Sports Network.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer along with Kevin Flaherty. If you haven't already, please subscribe. Apple, Spotify, leave us a 5-star rating and review. Drop a comment on our YouTube channel. Subscribe on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks, KCSN. Tons of ways to get in contact with the show as always. And we very much appreciate those of you that do all those great things and help us continue to grow our community of Kansas fans here at KCSN. So very much appreciate all of you that have done that. And if you haven't, what are you waiting for? Please subscribe on all of our platforms. So to continue that conversation, just to kind of put a bookend on it, Kevin, you mentioned the slot machine analogy of what maybe Kansas needs to happen now. Setting aside getting a Darrion Williams or a Dame Sarr, I was always under the impression throughout the course of this offseason that for Kansas to maybe be a national title contender, I think you have to expect or assume that you're going to get a Cooper Flagg-esque impact from Darren Peterson. Like Darren Peterson probably needs to be that level of player coming in for Kansas. And I know that's ridiculously high expectations, probably unfair expectations, but he's the presumed number 1 overall pick in the 2026 draft. So that is my assumption throughout this whole process is I think for Kansas to be again a national title team, you're looking at Darren Peterson needing to be that level of player, right? Like that level. And now even more so without having Darrion Williams or Dame Sarr on the roster. And so that to me was sort of 1A of, okay, this probably really needs to happen if Kansas is going to actually be a national title contender. And now even more so with the fact that you haven't gotten an additional scoring piece as well. And I think I really love what you said about Flory as well. You know, I think in kind of a weird way, depending on how the rest of this offseason pans out and what KD's final roster looks like, the pressure on Flory to be an NBA quality player as well next season, to me, has skyrocketed.
Yeah.
Like the pressure on him is through the roof now to be that level of player, because you're probably looking at him being your sort of number 2 guy, your partner in crime with Darren Peterson. And obviously he showed some flashes of being a really dominant offensive player last season in very brief moments. I know Kansas fans probably weren't totally thrilled with Flory looking pretty good when KJ Adams was hurt. KJ Adams comes back and Flory kind of takes a back seat in a lot of ways. Well, now he has a chance to maybe show what he can do for the entire season. And he's going to have to, I think, is really kind of the bottom line there. And then now, I think it also adds a little bit to the conversation of we've talked about Melvin Council. I think I think he's the guy that I like the most. Certainly the Kansas has gotten out of the transfer portal so far. But maybe not necessarily as a scorer, but now maybe he will need to be more of a scorer in this case now. Jaden Dawson was a guy that I think looked at initially as, hey, this guy could be a really good like 6th man sort of spark plug energy shooter type. Well, now he maybe just needs to be that level as a starter potentially now for Kansas. So I think it just kind of increases the pressure on everything that Kansas already has on this roster going forward. Now, when you start to look around at what the options are left for Kansas, we kind of already touched on it with RJ Luis, a guy that seemingly is fully focused on the NBA draft still, as we record this on May 22nd. Again, you have until May 28th to withdraw. And so, Luis, we'll see. I mentioned that May 28th deadline. There could be some surprise withdrawals. That seems to happen at least now over the past couple of years, where some guys do decide, I feel like maybe I'm misremembering this, Kevin, and you may be able to help me here, but like if I'm recalling right, like that was kind of the situation with Kevin McCullough. I don't think Kevin McCullough was really expected at all to withdraw, and then he did and ended up, playing at Kansas again. So it's possible that you could be looking at that situation, without having any specific details on names to watch there. It's just kind of hey, there may be a chance that a guy or two is a legitimate, just kind of surprise withdrawal, somebody that was expected to stay in and ultimately does not stay in. So that's a possibility. You mentioned going overseas. There is an overseas name that I have personally have kind of circled as somebody that I think could be worth keeping an eye on. And that is, I'm going to try to probably butcher his name here. I think it's Nicholas Neoklis Avdalos. He's a guard forward out of Greece. He's I believe playing in the Greece league, or has played in the Greece league. Also played in the Euro League. Most recently, he was playing in the Greece league most recently, and shot just over 40% from three on a relatively small sample size. Most recently in the Greek league. So he's an international guy that I would keep an eye on. This is from a ESPN story from last week, in which Avdalos said that he would probably go to college if he withdraws from the draft. He'd actually already taken a couple of visits to colleges, including Baylor and Virginia Tech. He's a 6'7" guy, so again, I think a player that could fit what KU might be looking for. But again, he is still in the draft. One thing to keep in mind with that is with international players, or with players not in college, I think they have an additional week to withdraw. So for guys that are like in the transfer portal that have been in college, it's May 28th. For anybody else, I think it's June 5th that they have until to actually officially withdraw. So that is one international name that I kind of did some digging on as somebody to possibly keep an eye on. But again, as you kind of mentioned with the international prospects at this point, Kevin, you're talking about more than likely getting somebody with probably a pretty low floor with maybe more of a higher ceiling. So a bit more of a gamble if you go that route. But again, the options are pretty thin at this point. You mentioned PJ Haggerty. I am under the impression, at least, that PJ Haggerty, from a financial standpoint, is going to cost probably as much or even more than Darrion Williams.
That would not surprise me. Yes,
yeah.
That would not surprise me.
And obviously, Kansas
is it similar possibly with Jameer Watkins from Florida State if he decides to pull out as well. He would be one that I would have circled because I think he would be a fit with his athleticism, with the defensive potential that he would have. So he would be another one. But again, you're talking a second team All ACC guy. That's not going to come cheap.
Yeah, and the other issue is Kansas still has not finalized its backup big situation yet either. We talked about Pax Sumnick, who took a visit previously about last week, previously at West Virginia, then at Oklahoma State. Like Kansas, I think it's pretty clear at this point Kansas is working with a bit of a constrained budget at this point, and also you still need to probably add a backup big man, which is going to eat into that a little bit as well. So. Yeah, it's hard to look at roles.
Two names off you just to get a reaction.
I would love it.
Two former Jayhawks sitting out there.
Okay,
Tylen Grant-Foster and Rakese Passmore.
Yeah, I knew Passmore was one of them. Passmore is still out there, but
my understanding is that Kansas hasn't really been in touch with Rakese at that point, but. No time like the present, but
yeah,
but no, I mean with him obviously being on the team a year ago and everything, I think that would be a call I would definitely consider making, because as we've talked about on the show, but even before he left, guys like Rakese Passmore who stick around, that's kind of Bill Self's bread and butter. These wings that get better over the course of their time at Kansas. Graham Foster being out there that's another one where you're not hearing Kansas brought up, but obviously Tylen Graham Foster was a Jayhawk a few years ago, is out there at seemingly age 37 still looking for his next college choice.
Yeah, I think the issue or the question with Rakese Passmore is what was that relationship like when he decided to move on, right?
Sure.
Is that a situation where that's more of a still a positive relationship in which maybe that is a possibility, or is it, in those situations, it's hard to tell, right? Some guys, I think, maybe burn bridges in those cases, or maybe not. So that one, I think,
And vice versa, right? Like staffs
Yeah.
burn bridges sometimes with
yeah.
with the way all of that went, and with the season Kansas had last year. I understood him entering the transfer portal in the first place because I think he was put in a really tough spot and that he wasn't getting regular playing time. And then Nick, it felt like he was getting thrown out there in really tough situations. Like, hey,
Yeah.
it's a big game. It's a close game with 5 minutes left to go into halftime. You maybe haven't even played the last couple games, but you're out here in a really key situation type of deal. And that's tough for anybody, much less a true freshman who's as young as Rakis is and everything else. I think that's an interesting one out there. And I know, obviously, Self and that staff, they were able to repair things with Flory somewhat after Flory entered the portal. I would be interested if I were on staff, that would be something that I'd maybe bring it up in a really soft voice at a meeting. I wouldn't say it out like super loud or confidently, but just sort of be like, hey, what about Ricky's password? And so he's one that I would find interesting just as somebody out there who's a really good athlete. And he would theoretically at least have a line to more playing time and a bigger role this year.
And then sort of the Hail Mary of Hail Marys, you mentioned it earlier, Tyron Stokes, the number one player in the class of 2026. There was a lot of chatter about, well, he's not playing basketball in the summer, so obviously that must mean that he's interested in reclassifying. Well, you can put those to bed. He is actually playing basketball this summer.
Yeah.
So him and everyone around him have publicly stated all along that there was never any consideration of reclassifying. I still believe that to be true. I have no reason to think otherwise. So that's like the ultimate, like, Uncle Rico, I can throw this Hail Mary over the mountains type play where, so just, again, probably don't expect it.
If he does, you can totally delete this show and like all of this episode, I should say, and all of the concerns and everything, because obviously, like, if you were able to somehow get Tyron Stokes to reclassify, it would be, the, oh, we are so back type of thing. But like you said, that's not just a long shot. That's a Lloyd Christmas, type long shot.
Yeah. Let's end the show with a little bit of positive news. I know we just kind of talked about it, but it did officially become official. Kansas announcing Jacques Vaughn as a new assistant coach on the Kansas basketball staff. It's a guy that we talked about quite a bit. So I don't want to spend too much time on it. We kind of already shared, I think, a lot of our thoughts on that, but just real quickly, the if you will, Kevin, the elevator pitch for what you think Jacques Vaughn being at Kansas means.
Yeah, well, first I want to ask a question. Were you alive when he played at KU?
No.
I did not think so.
I only know him as a Jayhawk through YouTube.
But for those of us who were, like, it was a really special time in that not only were those teams so dominant, like Jacques was the type of front man that every team in college basketball wished that they had. He was an academic, all everything. He was an All-America level player, the type of guy you wanted to be an ambassador for your program. He always wore a rubber band on his wrist, Nick, that he would snap whenever he made a mistake, and he would, letting himself sort of know, I guess, that he didn't need to be making that mistake. But it was so fascinating being a teenager when he was playing, because you would go and play pickup ball, Nick, and I swear to you, like, of the 10 guys on the court, 5 would have rubber bands because of Jacques Vaughn. And so somebody that was one of the most popular Jayhawks, I feel like, certainly in my lifetime. Even when you look at guys like Devontae and Frank and, and Sharon and different guys like that, just tremendously popular, incredibly smart. The elevator pitch is, I think, one, you just landed a guy who is an NBA head coach and all the things that go along with that, the X's and O's and how sharp you have to be to be an NBA head coach, with all of the things they run there. Immediate positive. I think he's somebody that relates really well to people, which is also part of the reason that he was an NBA head coach and part of the reason that he was an NBA player for as long as he was. And the other part is he's a former Jayhawk, but a former Jayhawk who didn't play for Bill Self. And I know that sounds silly and maybe it's not a concern or whatever else. Bill Self is a big personality. We all know this. Kind of a dominant guy. Jacques Vaughn is somebody that was never subservient, if you will, or never underneath Bill Self, either as a player or an assistant coach. And so because of that, I think that he's somebody that can look Bill Self in the eye and give his unbiased, unvarnished opinion on things. Whereas potentially maybe some other candidates, if you were looking in the Kansas family, might not have been able to do the same. And so just an absolutely great hire for so many different reasons. I know a lot of people are going to want to know, hey, is this head coach in waiting? I don't think it matters yet. I think the good news is you get to evaluate him, right? You get to have him right there on campus where you can say, hey, how does this guy recruit? How does he interact with players? What's the X's and O's like? You get to see sort of the entire picture there. And so that's a possibility, but I don't think you have to decide tomorrow, hey, this guy, the guy that's following Bill Self at Kansas. And I think that's another positive.
Yeah, honestly, I felt like that narrative was kind of crazy to begin with. Like, why would you hire a head coach in waiting when I listen, I recognize as much as anybody that Bill Self is in the twilight years of his coaching career at Kansas, maybe even in the next handful of years, right? But he has not publicly signaled any indication that he plans on retiring anytime soon. So I don't really get that angle, to be honest. So I agree with you on that. Like, I don't think it's part of it. I think it's if you want to consider him as a viable candidate, now you just have him in your program already, and you get a chance. Like I said, if you're Travis Goff, you get a chance to see him in action, so to speak, and understand maybe if that's the way you want to go. So yeah, I don't really buy that angle at all. I think kind of the second part of what you outlined as well is the critical part. I think it's a win-win for Kansas because of what you mentioned about he's in the Jayhawk family. He's somebody that absolutely, like, if you were to take a poll of fans, of Jayhawk fans, this would be a 100% approval rating, right? I don't think there's any Jayhawk fan around the country that is like, we hired who? Like, what? Why did we do that? So like, it's automatically a win from that standpoint because of that aspect of it. And because of the fact that he is a Jayhawk and he's going to probably inspire a lot of fans and get them excited. But the other aspect that you talked about, which is he's not going to be a pushover. He's not going to be somebody that's just going to be a yes man. I don't think. I think he's going to be somebody that's going to bring in and actually have a fresh perspective and have maybe a different way of viewing how the game is played and whatnot, and is going to be able to provide some insight into that a little bit more. So because of that, I think it's a win-win. I think you absolutely hit a home run with the fan base. You absolutely hit a home run with, if you're trying to inspire maybe more donors or whatever it may be, you hit a home run from that standpoint. But also you've brought in a guy with a very impressive coaching resume. And, without knowing, without being in the weeds in terms of assistant coaches around the entire country of college basketball, I have to assume that Jacques Vaughn instantly becomes like one of the most experienced assistant coaches in the country. And probably one of the only assistant coaches, if not the only assistant coach in the country that was a former NBA head coach. So like, you get both sides of it, which is why I think it's really a win-win for Kansas in that department. So that is the positive news for Kansas. They have filled out their coaching staff with probably the best hire I think they could have made when you look at it from sort of those two perspectives. So overall, slam dunk. I agree. Kevin, you got anything else to add here before we wrap the show?
No, I think we touched on a whole lot of it. I don't think this is going to be one of our more popular episodes in terms of people listening to it and being like, man, that left me with the warm and fuzzy.
Well, that's why I tried to end with Jacques Vaughn. I figured it would be something a little bit more positive.
Yeah. The people who have made it this long will thank you for sure. So
look,
we did touch on a lot, and I think it's something that you're going to want to pay attention over the next few weeks, because I think the initial strategy is not necessarily clear, and we could know quite a bit more about, hey, what plan B or plan C, however you want to put it, is here in the next couple weeks.
Look, I just call the balls and strikes, Kevin. That's all. I call it like I see it. And how I see it right now is absolutely there is cause to be concerned at the moment for Kansas.
Yep.
But, Bill Self has pulled a rabbit out of the hat in the past, and I wouldn't rule it out again here, depending on how things unfold. And so for that reason, if you haven't already, you should absolutely be subscribed to stay tuned to our shows, to stay tuned and stay involved and stay with our Jayhawk community that we're building here at KCSN, to stay plugged in on what's happening around Kansas athletics, Kansas basketball, Kansas football, and all things happening with Kansas. And so, and Kansas baseball, which I'm sure we'll be talking some too, as well as they get ready for their postseason run already at the Big 12 tournament as we record. So I really appreciate you. If you have supported us, if you have subscribed, all that good stuff, if you haven't, please do so you can stay informed, stay in touch, and join our growing Jayhawk community. We thank you so much for listening. And for Kevin Flaherty, I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you again soon. See ya.